No part of this documentary may be used or reproduced without the permission of the owner.
Hi, my name is Rita Jean Moran, and I have a story to tell about Lovelock Cave. There are many cases of anthropological finds of remains and artifacts that are unassociated with any known Native American tribe in America. There are missing remains that were found over 100 years ago, or even recently, that are kept in storage belonging to institutions and museums around America. One such case includes the remains and artifacts found in a cave outside of Lovelock, Nevada, now known as Lovelock Cave. These remains and their culture are currently unaffiliated with any known tribe per evidence introduced in a court case over the remains that began in 2016 and ended in 2017. Access to the Lovelock Cave remains is not easily obtainable. As of 2025, there are now claims that 5 skulls or crania from Lovelock Cave were given to a Paiute tribe by an unknown institution, and that Paiute tribe then asked for DNA testing. The DNA testing results returned some unexpected and unexplained results, and not all 5 skulls or crania were discussed in regards to their DNA results in the academic article that was published about the DNA testing. There was also no documentation found that was associated with these 5 skulls or crania, showing where they came from and proving that a chain of custody existed for these skulls or crania. This concerns me greatly, as we in the public don't have proof that these skulls or crania did indeed come from Lovelock Cave, and this is not addressed in the academic paper regarding the DNA testing. There is a certain amount of information available to the public about Lovelock Cave that may help to identify the ancestry of the Lovelock Cave people. By using the techniques of forensic art and forensic anthropology, and by looking at the folklore of the cave and artifacts recovered, a case for their ancestry may possibly be established. But until access to the confirmed and documented remains from Lovelock Cave are accessed for DNA testing, their ancestry identity cannot be concluded. After requesting permission to DNA test the confirmed and documented Lovelock Cave remains held at multiple institutions and government agencies in 2016 by myself, and failing in court by 2017, I decided to work on earning a master's degree in anthropology, since not having an advanced degree in anthropology was the main obstacle in court that prevented me from gaining access to the Lovelock Cave remains. Years later, after successfully completing the coursework for the program, I wrote a thesis regarding Lovelock Cave that uncovered many unknown facts about the Lovelock Cave people, unknown collectively to the public. Ultimately, my thesis was rejected and not given a passing grade. I was unable to contest the reasoning for the grade at the school I attended, and I had to write an entirely new thesis for another 1.5 years, hoping to pass in order to obtain my master's degree in anthropology. I was successful at doing so by 2025, and I received my anthropology degree at the end of 2025. The story of the Lovelock Cave people deserves to be told, and to be told in truth and its entirety. The people from Lovelock Cave were said to have been exterminated by the Paiute. It is time for their acknowledgement as to who they were and how long they were in the area before they were genocided, and for us to place their memory in the history books in an accurate manner without politics being involved. This is the story of my journey to unlock the truth on who these alleged red-haired cannibalistic giants of Lovelock Cave were. This film includes some of the work I did in my thesis, with a lot of additional information added in that was not part of my original thesis, including some of the many newspaper articles regarding the cave and the Lovelock Cave people. This compilation of information will be new to the public, and much of what I have uncovered has not been discussed online or in other books, films, or sources. This film is a result of years of research by myself, starting in 2013 regarding Lovelock Cave, although my journey into uncovering the true and correct history of the past in our world had begun years beforehand. A curious tale of missing remains, disappearing evidence, blocking information on the Lovelock Cave people, and establishment examinations that confirmed parts of the Lovelock Cave story will unfold. There are currently 574 federally recognized tribes in America. Yet there are many tribes that have come and gone before these recognized tribes, of which there is no true identification or information on what happened to them in ancient America. One of them is the unaffiliated Lovelock Cave people of ancient Nevada, outside of Reno, Nevada, that were said to be cannibalistic, red-headed, white giants, per Paiute traditions and per the anthropologist who excavated the cave. The mystery of Lovelock Cave has stuck with me since I heard about it, and there seemed to be no real attempt by academia to explain their ancestry or their cited red hair and gigantism, nor their detailed history, other than displaying some of their artifacts at local museums and the Nevada State Museum in Carson City, Nevada. Back in 2016, after a lot of research and tracking, I attempted to access the human remains of the Lovelock Cave people that were stored at multiple museums and universities, but under the control of the Bureau of Land Management and the Smithsonian Institute. I attempted to obtain DNA testing. I was denied access, even though I had a master's degree in bioinformatics, the study of genetics using the power of computer programming. I was denied access after waiting for about 6 months from the initial request, and then I subsequently took the BLM to court and asked a federal judge in Chicago to grant me access to the Lovelock Cave remains for DNA testing and examination. I am also a paralegal, and I had to represent myself in federal court because I could not find a lawyer to represent me at the time, even though there was case precedence from the legal court case of Kennewick Man. At first, I won the case due to the defendant not showing up in court, and then the case was overturned due to paperwork error claims, and I eventually lost the case in 2017 due to not having an appropriate educational background in anthropology, which required a master's degree minimum in anthropology or what they considered equivalent. Instead of pursuing the case further in court, I decided to seek out an anthropology degree to make sure I could not be denied again. After finally getting accepted into a university, I completed the program after 5 years and thousands of dollars later, and I had centered my initial thesis around the Lovelock Cave mystery. I was not given a passing grade for the first thesis, and I had to write a brand new second thesis on a different topic, and I eventually passed and graduated in 2025. What follows in this documentary is some of what was written in my thesis regarding the Lovelock Cave people, and a lot of additions, and the story of my attempt to access the remains and determine with finality the ancestry of the Lovelock Cave people. I have also included some theories of my own regarding the Lovelock Cave people, and have included some possible associations of them with other mentioned red-haired and dark-haired giants of ancient America by matching petroglyphs, ancient artifacts and sites, and other ancient American stories. As previously stated, the Lovelock Cave people of ancient Nevada were said to be red-headed and cannibalistic and giants. Yet their full identity and ancestry origin still remain unknown, even though remains of more than 40 individuals, some with associated red hair, were recovered from Lovelock Cave in the early 20th century. During my last visit in 2015 to the museum display and museum website in 2023 for the Lovelock Cave people at the Nevada State Museum in Carson City and to the Humboldt Museum website in 2023, artifacts were on display, but no information was provided about the origin, appearance, or alleged cannibalistic practices of the Lovelock Cave people. While the examination of the Lovelock Cave people that has been done has provided us with some information about the Lovelock Cave people, there is still no clear conclusion on ancestry origin of the Lovelock Cave people, nor is there a conclusion on the origin of their cited red hair, tall stature, or alleged cannibalistic practices. Another round of examination of old and new data was made by myself to determine whether a conclusion on the ancestry affiliation of the Lovelock Cave people could be made. Archaeological excavations at Lovelock Cave were conducted over several months in 1912 by L.L. Loud, continued in 1924 by Loud and M.R. Harrington, and occurred again in the 1960s by Robert Heiser and his team. From these excavations, some analysis of the individual remains from Lovelock Cave were made. This data can be used for analysis to make a case in determining possible ancestry. Some craniometric data was collected in the 1920s after the human remains were recovered. Further craniometric data was collected on the Lovelock Cave remains as part of Carr Kennedy's master's degree. The craniometric information we have about the remains from Lovelock Cave is limited and has not been revisited since Carr Kennedy's master's thesis work. Yet, the Lovelock Cave site has been studied for over 100 years. Some dating analysis was done. An examination of coprolites from the cave was made back in the 1960s. Coprolite examination did not show evidence of cannibalism, while some bones from the cave did show carvings and possible evidence of cannibalism. Recently, some DNA testing was allowed for 4 or 5 alleged Lovelock Cave remains in 2018 for a DNA comparison study of ancient Americans. The federal registered notices for the repatriated skulls showing their origin have never been found, although the study supplement cites 5 skulls as being repatriated to the Nevada Fallon Band of Paiute Shoshone tribe from museums or a museum, and then transferred to researchers for DNA study. The DNA testing that has been done is a good start and is promising, yet we are still not given a complete analysis of all of the Lovelock Cave remains, nor has a determination of the origin of the red hair and tall stature cited for the Lovelock Cave people been established. I also question where the 4 or 5 skulls that were DNA tested were really found, as my research indicates that at times amateur anthropologists were picking up human remains, including skulls they would find around the area, and kept in their personal collections, which then found their way to local museums. Photographs of the Lovelock Cave skulls crania that were DNA tested were not presented in the DNA study. Thus, it is not possible to determine if the tested skull or crania characteristics were similar to that of the Lovelock Cave skulls or crania that were shown in old anthropological photographs and newspaper articles. The history of Lovelock Cave may be able to be reconstructed by using current forensic anthropology approaches that were not done at the time of finding the remains, nor in subsequent years after the 1960s. By studying old books, newspaper articles, Native American legends and testimonies, recorded history, museum artifacts and remains, old maps, craniometric measurements, forensic anthropology methods, and forensic art, and comparing and combining the compilation of data with the new data and new analysis, the history of the ancient people of Lovelock Cave may be able to be reconstructed with a possible ancestry identity and population origin by using forensic art and forensic anthropology when access to the remains is not currently available and DNA testing is not complete. However, even the lack of forensic anthropological measurements may also be problematic in determining identity of these ancient people. There has been no current and comprehensive study to determine the identity or physical appearance of the Lovelock Cave people, or why they were cited as having red hair and being of giant stature per Paiute traditions and old newspaper articles. Additionally, videos of alleged remains of skulls and crania from the cave are floating around on online platforms such as YouTube or cable shows such as Ancient Aliens that show a very large skull in comparison to normal skulls that was alleged from Lovelock Cave. Yet, nobody knows where that skull is today. And nobody that has an anthropological background has been able to have access to it in an honest and open manner to come to a conclusion of why that skull was as large as it was. The data on the Lovelock Cave people is limited, but there is enough to begin a critical analysis of who the Lovelock Cave people were. It is hard for myself, and probably most people, to accept any of the current explanations in regards to the Lovelock Cave people after over 100 years of telling stories of the Lovelock Cave genocide, ancient wars in America, red-haired giants and cannibals, actual video and photographs of giant skulls shown next to a normal-sized human skull, more elaboration on Lovelock Cave by the Paiutes, the old newspapers that wrote about Lovelock Cave, the multiple anthropologists that contributed to the study of Lovelock Cave, old books that described the find, institutions and museums with access to the remains that display a minimal amount of what was taken from Lovelock Cave, the testimony and written works of amateur anthropologists and what they found, other ancient remains that were similar to Lovelock Cave found around America, and a confirmation of tall stature and red-headed remains from Lovelock Cave. Sadly, some of the conclusions about the remains after academic study by myself conflict with each other. Even the reasoning for the red hair that was still attached to some of the remains taken from Lovelock Cave conflict with each other. The prevention of any kind of further study of the remains also raises red flags as to why we cannot have the truth about Lovelock Cave. Who is benefiting from this? And why can't we have an explanation of who the Lovelock Cave people were and why were they cited as being white, giant, cannibalistic, and have been in all over ancient Nevada? Why are we being blocked from the truth? What follows in this documentary is a compilation of the study that I have done and compiled to put together what has been written or studied about the Lovelock Cave people and what we can do going forward. This is my story of my research into Lovelock Cave. Among the traditions of our people is one of a small tribe of barbarians who used to live along the Humboldt River. It was many hundred years ago. They used to waylay my people and kill and eat them. They would dig large holes in our trails at night, and if any of our people traveled at night, which they did, for they were afraid of these barbarous people, they would oftentimes fall into these holes. That tribe would even eat their own dead. Yes, they would even come and dig up our dead after they were buried and would carry them off and eat them. Now and then, they would come and make war on my people. They would fight, and as fast as they killed one another on either side, the women would carry off those who were killed. My people say they were very brave. When they were fighting, they would jump up in the air after the arrows that went over their heads and shoot the same arrows back again. My people took some of them into their families, but they could not make them like themselves. So at last they made war on them. This war lasted a long time. Their numbers were about 2,600. The war lasted some 3 years. My people killed them in great numbers, and what few were left went into the thick bush. My people set the bush on fire. This was right above Humboldt Lake. Then they went to work and made tule or bulrush boats and went into Humboldt Lake. They could not live there very long without fire. They were nearly starving. My people were watching them all around the lake and would kill them as fast as they would come on land. At last, one night, they all landed on the east side of the lake and went into a cave near the mountains. It was a most horrible place, for my people watched at the mouth of the cave and would kill them as they came out to get water. My people would ask them if they would be like us and not eat people like coyotes or beasts. They talked the same language, but they would not give up. At last, my people were tired, and they went to work and gathered wood and began to fill up the mouth of the cave. Then the poor fools began to pull the wood inside till the cave was full. At last, my people set it on fire. At the same time, they cried out to them, "Will you give up and be like men and not eat people like beasts? Say quick and be like men and not eat people like beasts. Say quick, we will put out the fire." No answer came from them. My people said they thought the cave must be very deep or far into the mountain. They had never seen the cave nor known it was there until then. They called out to them as loud as they could, "Will you give up? Say so or you will all die." But no answer came. Then they all left the place. In 10 days, some went back to see if the fire had gone out. They went back to my 3rd or 5th great-grandfather and told him they must all be dead. There was such a horrible smell. The tribe was called People Eaters, and after my people had killed them all, the people round us called us Saidukara. It means conqueror. It also means enemy. I do not know how we came by the name Paiutes. It is not an Indian word. I think it is misrepresented. Sometimes we are called pine nut eaters, for we are the only tribe that lives in the country where pine nuts grow. My people say that the tribe we exterminated had reddish hair. I have some of their hair, which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress, which has been in our family a great many years, trimmed with this reddish hair. I am going to wear it sometime when I lecture. It is called the mourning dress, and no one has such a dress but my family.
All right. I am at the cave entrance. And I'm going to go in for a bit. Making pretty dark in here. I'm in. Okay. I'm in. And it is dark. Okay. Let's take a look at the ceiling. Yep, a lot of blackness. I don't know if that's from the old back guano or what. Let's take a look. Now, I got another area here. I'll go down these steps carefully. It's very dark. Okay. This is where that other entrance was. Let's see if I can get better. Here. Wow. It is dark. This is it. The cave that they took refuge in. Okay, I'm going to shut this off for a minute. See if I can get some light.
After the two anthropologists excavated Lovelock Cave, they wrote a book in 1929 about Lovelock Cave. And in it they wrote, quote, "The best specimen of the adult mummies was boiled and destroyed by a local fraternal lodge, which wanted the skeletons for initiation purposes."
And that's the exit entrance. Yeah. Okay. Now the ceiling looks a little strange, and I don't know if that's from fire or bat guano. It's like segments of black rock. But, the ground is just pretty normal. But you can see over here, there's no black stuff on this rock, which has the same segmentation. So it could be from a fire. Here's where it gets black in the ceiling too, as well. And pretty dark over here. So maybe they threw the fire in from that entrance over there. Interesting looking face and hand formed on that ceiling. I'm going to try and get a picture of it too. Okay, so that is Lovelock Cave. And you can see over here, they had a lookout area, and had a good view if something was coming up. Pretty darn good view. Okay, that's it. Lovelock Cave. Okay. This is archaeological excavation of Lovelock Cave. Began in 1912. Archaeologists worked in dark and dusty conditions and found large areas disturbed by the earlier work of the guano miners. The first excavator, Llewellyn Loud, was joined in 1924 by archaeologist Mark Harrington. Together they excavated 40 storage pits inside the cave. Within one pit was the now famous cache of ancient duck decoys. The storage pits held items such as fishing gear, sagebrush, bark sandals, leather moccasins, a mouse skin blanket, shell beads, a carved wooden grasshopper, and finally, woven wickerwork basketry. Overall, more than 20,000 artifacts were discovered. The storage pits were 2 to 4 feet deep. They were lined with grass or old basket parts, filled with goods and sealed with grass and stones. The top of each pit was located level with the cave floor, which varied significantly over time. By comparing these pit top levels and the styles of artifacts, archaeologists were able to assign time periods to each pit. The cave revealed many different phases of use by Native Americans. Someone has crossed that off. Interesting. Divided into what archaeologists call stratigraphic layers. These layers form from sediments and other materials that accumulate on top of the living spaces. By comparing layers and artifacts, animal bones, coprolites, which are fossil feces, and fossil plants, archaeologists were able to determine changes in ways of life and cultures over time. So just take a look at that. I just want to show you that someone scratched off Native Americans. Obviously, they feel the same way that I do, that these were, Phoenicians or Europeans or the Sami, a group that is being hidden. So that is it. Lovelock Cave.
Our very oldest American, amazing discoveries found in huge Nevada cave, sealed by nature some 3,000 years ago. Mummies and skulls of race which antedates the Aztecs or Egyptians, with carload of their handiwork, comprise newest archaeological discovery made in this century. The Archaeological Department of the University of Nevada has nearly completed the exploration of a cave in Nevada, sealed up by nature 3,000 years ago, which contains relics of what is believed to be the ancient race from which the American Indians sprung, a race far older than the Aztecs. Among the things brought to light is a skull declared to be more than 5,000 years old, certainly and possibly in existence several hundred thousands of years ago. If these surmises are correct, it is older than any Egyptian mummy, older than the Piltdown skull found in Kent, England, which is thought to be 150,000 years old. Certainly, the Nevada bones are those of the oldest American. The malar bones are less in area than any specimen extant in proportion to the huge size of the skull. The frontal bone and superior maxillary bones are unusually large, while the inferior maxillary bones are extremely small. These differences establish a complete separation in race from all others known, except that it is thought probable that the present peculiarities of Indian craniums are traceable to these distinctive formations. Along the skull were found many relics of a prehistoric race in a remarkable state of preservation, because they had been hermetically sealed in nature's own preservatives. There were mats and tools and household utensils and toys for the children, and the walls were scarred with hieroglyphics which may have been old before the first tablet was inscribed on the walls of Babylon. Scientists all over the country have become interested in the find. While the cavern was opened some time ago, it has been within the last few years that mining operations, through its immense guano beds, brought to light the relics and picture writing it has been found to contain. The cavern, so far as it has been explored, is about 900 feet long, 400 feet wide, and has a height of hundreds of feet in places. It is a magnificent tomb for a vanished race. Fortunately for public credulity, the story of the discovery comes stamped with the approval of the Nevada scientists. Otherwise, one would think some romancer of the Rider Haggard type had been busy. It begins with a Paiute Indian legend of a lost race which had taken refuge from enemies in a mountain, much as the children of Hamelin did when they followed the Pied Piper. The legend was repeated to the scientists by an educated Paiute girl, and they attacked the side of a mountain until they came upon the cave. There they found the last traces of a long-forgotten civilization. The first mention of this ancient civilization that is remembered by white men dates back to 1844, when General Fremont led from California a little band of whites across a new trail through the Rockies. He followed the Humboldt River until he came to the shores of what is now called Humboldt Lake, a half-mile east of the main Humboldt Range of mountains and a mile south of Lovelock, Nevada. In the region of the lake, he entered the land of the Paiutes, the chief of whom was Winnemucca. The trail makers were met by the Indian chieftain with open arms. General Fremont and his party were guests of the Paiute band for many days. Familiarity with other tribes had taught Fremont a method of communication by means of signs. He asked the Indian chief if he, in his great wisdom, could tell the white men whence came the red men, their origin. The aged chief, by signs, indicated that the history of the Indians went back to the beginning of the world. It told how his ancestors had driven a whole nation into a huge cavern and sealed them there to perish. When years later Chief Winnemucca had learned the white man's tongue, the Paiute legend spread among the pioneer miners and finally reached the ears of scientific men. With the coming of educators into Nevada in the last 25 years, interest quickened with repeated fossil discoveries in the beds of extinct rivers and on the walls of canyons. At Winnemucca's death, his daughter Sarah became attached to the families of Army officers, and through them, the legends became public when they were recounted in a book printed in 1870. Her granddaughter, Sarah Winnemucca, was educated in a reservation school. Her imagination, fired by the legends of her people, she repeated them to her instructors until finally Professor J.C. Jones, chief of the archaeological department of the State University, determined to make a search for the lost cave. The stories indicated that it must be somewhere near the Humboldt Lake. Sarah Winnemucca picked a spot as near as the legends could guide her. Here, the side of the hill was tapped. The instinct of the Indian girl, fed by the legend of Saidukara, had been unerring. 20 feet through the rocky wall of the hill, the picks fell into space, and the prehistoric cave stretched dark and seemingly void before the searchers. Aid was given by the university, and a party of explorers entered the vast cavity. The floor was found to be of guano deposited by bats which had long since deserted the cave. Above the guano deposit, the tracings of hieroglyphics were visible, however, reaching up from the depths below. It was thought advisable to mine into the guano deposit, and this was begun. The result has been the discovery of a civilization, older even, it is thought, that is intimated by the Paiute legends. The first sign of the great antiquity of the Indians who once peopled the cave was the depth of the guano deposit left by the bats, which themselves have long ago disappeared. The floor of the cave and the bones and markings of prehistoric animals were not found until months of burrowing had reached downward 900 feet. Millions of bats must have occupied the cave for 1,000 ages to have left this enormous deposit behind. Whence came these winged inhabitants, and what became of them still remains a mystery. No opening to the cave was found. The interior was hermetically sealed. Yet, there were no remains of the bats themselves. They came after the human inhabitants had starved to death for the lack of egress. They remained until they had almost filled the enormous cave and disappeared as mysteriously as they came. In the Humboldt Mountains, there is no record of bats having been seen in any numbers within the memory of Nevada historians. From the floor of the cave, an exploring party led by Professor Jones of the Nevada University, R.L. Fulton, author of Indian Histories and Explorations, Miss Jean Weir, president of the Nevada Historical Society, and other students of the Indian history have recovered more than a freight car load of weird relics of the men who lived there, cornered and trapped by their younger enemies and forced to die for want of egress. These are part of the University of Nevada collection and have just been put on display in the halls of the Historical Society building. Baskets made from snake skins, tool grass, and river reeds. Water bottles from grass so closely woven that even today they will not leak when filled with water. Robes of ingeniously woven cloth, proving that these people already had adopted some type of clothing, a characteristic lost by later tribes. Implements for making fire, proving that the tribe had discovered the virtues of flint. Woven sandals and blankets made from threads and countless other mementos were found scattered on the floor. So closely did some of these relics, especially the water bottles and snakeskin ropes, resemble the work of later Indians that it was at first thought the extinct tribe could date no farther back than a few thousand years, despite the evidence of the guano deposit. Threads of cotton were found in the garments, and even intermingled with the grasses with which water bottles were woven. History has recorded no appearance of cotton in Nevada until transplanted by the white pioneers, but the microscope revealed in these cotton threads unmistakable evidence that cotton had been grown on the desert lands under an irrigation system, the evidence of which has been found since along the Humboldt and Carson rivers. This cotton growing and weaving later became a lost art to the Indians, to be revived by the whites. The texture of the weave is said to be superior to the hand weave of the 40s. On the floor were bones of what has been decided to have been a corral of prehistoric horses, opening new fields for historians. Elephants' tusks were strewn in corners, although there are no records in the history of the Rocky Mountain region of elephants ever existing. Markings of the feet of strange birds are similar to those found in many Nevada canyons, which have never been explained. In his technical report, Professor Jones has declared that these bird feet markings are the same as those found 20 feet under solid rock in the quarries at the Nevada Penitentiary, and which must have been made in the vast distance before the Nevada desert became a great lake, later to become arid land again, a transition which marked the passing of many thousands of years. The human skulls, which were strewn in great profusion about the floor of the cave, are of a shape that merely indicates a similarity between the unknown race and that of modern Indians. They show huge proportions, which indicate a race of men of great stature. The skulls and bones, which evidently are of the women members of the tribe, seem to prove that the women were of far smaller stature, a distinction not in evidence among later Indians. Stone instruments for cooking and the grinding of corn and pine nuts are signs of a culinary art which had been thought peculiar alone in the early ages to the Aztecs. And here and there, along the side of the wall, raised high from the floor, niches large enough for sleeping quarters for a family reveal the characteristics of the Pueblo dwellers of a later generation. Of the human bones, one skull, thought to be older than the rest, has received the particular attention of the scientists. It must have belonged to a person of great stature and strength. The malar or cheekbones are less in proportion than any known specimen. The frontal bone and upper jawbone are unusually large, while the lower jawbone is extremely small. These differences establish a complete separation in race if modern Indian crania may be traced to them. One of the most interesting of the relics discoveries, the origin of that instrument of universal peace, always thought to be a modern invention, the baby's rattle. Out of the grim material, however, did these ancient mothers make the playthings for their papooses. A score or more were discovered in the cave, the hollow-sounding ball being made by stretched snake skins, stiffened into permanent shape, and some mysterious process that may never be known. Inside were grains of corn, long since petrified under the influence of another unknown fluid. The edges of the convex pieces of snakeskin were sewn with cotton threads, and a wooden handle for the tiny hands to grasp was thrust aside. The geological report upon the formation of the cave is what has most seriously upset all calculations as to the history of American civilization and its ancient peoples. There has been no definable record of the origin of the Indians, only nebulous theories of their immigration from the Aryan settlements in Asia. Geological report fixes the time when the Nevada cave must have been closed, either by nature or by the ancient Paiutes, at an age before even the day of Aryan restlessness. The first hint of the great antiquity of the people who inhabited the opening in the mountain was given the university archaeologists by the formation of the rocks from which the cooking utensils were made. These were found to hide no traces of the tool from the prehistoric Lake Lahontan, which once spread over the whole of Nevada, drying up with the progress of centuries, its vast tool beds becoming historical through the appearance of tool markings in the strata of stone which surfaces the state under the desert lands. Rock samples found in the cave indicated to the scientists that it antedated the formation of Lake Lahontan, although this lake disappeared before the ancestors of the present Indians lived there. Professor Jones and his party discovered that the new stone had been formed by nature since the cave was closed by the besieging horde. The archaeologists say the cave itself has existed since the Triassic age, more than 50 million years ago. It hardly seems possible, says Professor Jones, that this forgotten race could have lived more than 20,000 years ago. But the history, as written in the complete strata of surrounding stone, tells an irrefutable story of the passage of millions of years since it was totally closed. It is difficult to count years beyond the million, yet the formation of the earth, which the Paiutes threw across the opening of the cave, indicates that there were people living in America 1 million years ago. Investigations in the cave are continuing under the auspices of the Nevada University and the Historical Society. It is expected that their completion will completely disclose the history of the origin of the American Indian, which until the opening of the cave was discovered was an unfathomable mystery. Caught by surprise, the shocked cannibals, who had no weapons, at first retreated in terror, but later regrouping, hid behind stone walls and hurled huge rocks at the unrelenting attackers. After the furiously fought battle was over, many Washoe warriors lay mortally wounded among the greening sage brush. Across the barren desert farther east, the Paiutes were waging their own desperate battles for survival against the giant cannibals. Natchez later, at odd times, discussed these ancient struggles with Reed, but only because the intrigued young Reed refused to let the matter rest. "Old story," the chief sighed impatiently one day. "My grandmother tell. Aunt know better. You talk her." Jack lost little time in riding out to see Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins. As she squatted in front of her small home, he found her surprisingly expansive. "Giants waylay Paiutes," she said. "Kill, eat," she added. "Paiutes travel night. Giants dig hole in trail. Paiute fall in. Giants eat. Giant women like vulture." Sarah went on to explain that originally there were about 2,600 giants around Humboldt Lake, but 3 years of war with them greatly reduced that number. Finally, when the remaining giants fled into the bush, the Paiutes set the bush on fire. In desperation, the cannibals made bulrush boats and rowed them into the lake. The Paiutes kept constant watch from the bank to prevent the giants from landing, so they were soon near starvation. One night, apparently, the giants quietly paddled ashore on the east side of the lake and ran quickly into Lovelock Cave, but the Paiutes saw them enter. The Paiutes filled the cave entrance with sagebrush, and then offered amnesty if the giants would not eat people like coyotes. But the giants refused, so the Paiutes set the sagebrush on fire. In 10 days they returned. The giants inside had been suffocated by smoke, and the stench of charred flesh was frightful. Sarah went into her house, then emerged with a long dress trimmed in dingy red. It was dress of grief, she explained hollowly, handed down from mother to daughter in her family. The red trim was of hair that came from the head of the last slaughtered cannibal, she said. Jack was eager to explore Lovelock Cave, because if what the Indians said was true, remains of the cannibal giants still should be inside the cave. But his father fell seriously ill, and Jack was forced to take over his hardware businesses. Settlers had been pouring into Lovelock Valley, and immigrants following the overland trail stopped to replenish dwindling supplies before their final push onward to California. But Jack couldn't forget the Indians' fearful stories. Ordering books from Reno, he devoured everything in print concerning Nevada and its early occupants. He learned that 70,000 years ago, 8,000 square miles of this area had been covered by Pleistocene Lake Lahontan. As the waters receded 10,000 years ago, they lapped at the outcroppings of Jurassic limestone, forming Lovelock Cave at an elevation of 4,240 feet. They left behind Humboldt and Pyramid Lakes. And, in a small worn volume, he read of a reputed band of red-haired cannibals who had roamed Southern California and Arizona 3,000 years ago. They were a craven tribe whose human prey was invariably the same: a woman, a child, or a solitary hunter. Finally, angry Indian tribes united in rebellion against the cannibals and the repulsive habit of eating human flesh. Driven by fear and revulsion, they attacked in great numbers, slaughtering the giants with a vengeful lack of mercy, forcing the remaining ones to flee in screaming terror. Eventually, there was only one band of cannibals left, and the southern Paiutes drove them into northwestern Nevada. The giants split into two bands, one settling on the shores of Humboldt Lake, the other in the Pyramid Caves. Here, in the midst of an inhospitable desert land, they found respite and plenty in the oasis of tule beds and rush-infested lake shores. As the years passed, Jack's dream of exploring the cave faded. Occasionally, Chief Natchez, sensing his friend's disappointment, spoke more freely of the Siduca. He told of a whole village of the ancient people on Winnemucca Lake, and said the ruins of their stone houses were there. He also mentioned of a cave called Tahateca, where the giants had left their drawings, and a band of them called the Agastisi lived in rock shelters on Anaho, an island in Pyramid Lake. The chief's ancestors had said the giants buried their dead chiefs by placing them and their prized possessions on tule rafts, then piling rocks on the rafts to sink them. Apparently, their grisly custom of eating their dead didn't apply to their leaders. Great-grandfather Chief Truckee say Paiute kill Siduca, cut off fingers, ears, tied to girl's blanket, Natchez said. As Jack listened to Natchez's tales and thought of all those told by other Paiutes and Washus, he sometimes wondered, as did many white men, if the existence of the cannibals were only a legend. There were so many discrepancies in the Indian stories. Some spoke of the cannibals as dim-witted giants who lacked even the crudest weapon, while others said they fought skillfully with spear and bow. Many Paiutes spoke in admiration of the cannibals' skill at making beautiful baskets, rush sandals, duck-down clothing, and tule rafts. They even attributed to the giants an adeptness at making duck decoys and intricately woven nets for trapping waterfowl, both skills learned from an older and advanced culture, whose hapless members the cannibals eventually devoured. The scoffers, on the other hand, insisted that the giants were so unimaginative they wore clothes made of the mud hen's feathers, and that their only trapping was of an unfortunate Paiute and Washoe. Any doubts Jack Reed had concerning the red-haired giant's existence, however, were dispelled one crisp fall morning in 1911 in Lovelock, where he chanced to meet Jim, a miner who told an intriguing story about a recent discovery in Lovelock Cave. And almost before the miner was halfway through his story, Jack was galloping along beside him toward the cave. Jim, who recently had filed a mining claim with David Poog, had tunneled into the mountainside near the cave's narrow entrance. Once inside, the miner noticed immediately that at some time there had been a huge fire in the cave because the walls and ceiling were black, and scattered among the thick layer of bat guano lay thousands of charged sagebrush stems. 4 feet down, they unearthed a wealth of well-preserved Indian relics. Boas of fine feathers, sandals, woven bags, bird trapping nets, baskets, and spears. But their most startling find was in the south end of the cave, where they uncovered a striking red-haired mummy of a man, approximately 6 feet 6 inches tall. And near the man's body lay 4 other mummies, all giants, all with dingy red hair. As Jack stood staring down at the remains of the giant cannibals, he noticed that the biggest of them had a grass rope knotted tightly around his neck, mute evidence that the desperate giant had chosen the quick way out rather than face a slow and agonizing death by fire. First, we contacted the Smithsonian Institution, but they couldn't send anyone out here because of lack of funds, Jim said. So we notified the Nevada Historical Society and Dr. J.C. Merriam of the University of California. At the time, Merriam sent archaeologist L.L. Loud from the University of California in April 1912. Most of the specimens outside the cave had been either ruined by inclement weather or carted off by relic hunters. And all of the giant mummies had disappeared. But during his 4-month excavation of the cave, Loud collected 10,000 other archaeological specimens, including many human skeletal remains and a cache of duck decoys, all currently housed in Berkeley's Lowy Museum, the Nevada Historical Society building in Reno, and the Museum of the American Indian. Then, in 1924, the Hay Foundation sent M.R. Harrington to Nevada to join Loud. Before they were through exploring the cave, they had discovered one of the most detailed and best preserved records of prehistoric life ever found in Western America, life of the ancient Lovelock culture that had begun around 1000 BC. It apparently ended abruptly about the same time of the arrival of the giants, circa AD 900, according to the Paiutes. Still, they uncovered no other mummies of giant cannibals, and this puzzled Jack. The Paiutes explained the paucity of giant remains by saying that there only had been a small band of Psittaca left when the Paiutes finally exterminated them, and besides, relic hunters, numerous in the area, probably removed the remaining mummies. Or some of the giants could have found a secret exit, thus escaping death. Holders of this theory were convinced that a number of the giants did in fact escape, eventually reaching the Pacific Northwest, where they became known as the elusive Sasquatch or Bigfoot. One day shortly before Harrington left Nevada, Coffee Charlie told Jack at the local fraternal lodge had one of the giants. But when Jack finally found the lodge, he was much too late, because some of the members, wanting a skeleton for initiation purposes, had already boiled all the flesh off the last existing cannibal mummy. Recently, I was in the small town of Imlay, just north of Lovelock, as the guest of Chief Rolling Mountain Thunder, probably the foremost authority of Indians of the West. As we drove out towards Lovelock Cave in the chief's ancient jeep, we could barely make out the dark clumps of sagebrush in a driving snowstorm. Thunder had been talking about the giant's red hair, due according to scientists to chemical action in the cave soil rather than that to pigmentation. Suddenly, without transition, the chief said gruesomely, "In country like this, is it any wonder people practice cannibalism? After all, during lean times, particularly in the winter, a man did represent 175 pounds of meat on the hoof." Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he added, "If the giants really were red-headed, though let them remain that way. Immigrants, perhaps from some other continent. We Indians have enough problems without cannibalism being added to them." Amazing artifacts from Lovelock Cave uphold movie land's make-believe about our Indians. Nevada find added greatly to world's knowledge. So Nevada Paiutes are Hollywood's idea of Mongols. How fantastic can the movies get? Were those your thoughts the other day at the news that when the public sees the Technicolor production 60 Saddles for Gobi, the Mongolians will actually be our Paiutes, and the Gobi is our own desert on the road to Gerlach, where the filming is now being done? Many, however, were not surprised at all. Why not? Relics dating from a century before Christ on display in the extensive prehistoric Nevada exhibit of the Nevada State Historical Society Museum in the State Building, Reno, definitely support the theory that North American Indians descended from nomad Asiatic tribes. The Lovelock Cave. Unearthed in Lovelock Cave, about 22 miles south of Lovelock, these relics vastly increase the world's knowledge of ancient people in North America. The preservation conditions were equaled only by those of Egypt, Peru, and a few other sites on this continent. For that reason, thousands of whole objects such as mummies, baskets, sandals, wooden implements, etc., were unearthed here, whereas mere fragments or only traces of them have been found in most archaeological sites. If you are a skeptic about the idea of Asiatic descent, look at the cone-shaped helmet fashioned from coarse woven reeds. It instantly invokes thoughts of Kublai Khan and is very similar to those worn by Koreans today. This same type of weaving may be seen in several sandals in the museum's exhibit. One is over 15 inches long, substantiating the myths handed down in the Paiute tribe that these people were giants. A jawbone twice the size of modern man's, and skeletons recovered measured 6 feet to 9 feet, give definite confirmation of the giant stories. 2,000 years ago, the experts, in fact, have long agreed that North American Indians originated from a long succession of invading bands of Tatars who thousands of years ago crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia. The entire distance is only 40 miles, and the Diomede Islands in between form natural stepping stones. Some scientists think the invaders may have come so long ago they were able to travel across the Aleutians when they were a solid land bridge. In 1833, Josiah Priest, compiling evidence of the antiquarian societies of that time, published a most interesting book entitled American Antiquities and Discoveries in the West, being an exhibition of the evidence that an ancient population of partially civilized nations differing entirely from those of present Indians, peopled America many centuries before its discovery by Columbus. A copy of this rare book is preserved in the archives of the Historical Society's Reference Library. Priest stated, "The remains of cities and towns of an ancient population exist everywhere on the coast of the Pacific, which agrees in fashion with the works and ruins found along the Chinese coasts, showing beyond all dispute that in ancient times the countries were known to each other." He points out that when the Spaniard Hernando Soto was exploring in the West, he visited a Chinese Mongol town in latitude 39, longitude 87, on the bank of a river running into the Pacific from the territory now called Oregon. Fu Shan. Rafinesque, the great antiquarian priest, reminds his readers, says the exact time when the Chinese first discovered America is not given in their books, but it was known to them and to the Japanese, he says, at a very early period, and called by them Fu Shan, and frequented for trade. Indians living today along the Mackenzie River in Canada and in North British Columbia are of definitely established Siberian type. Scientists agree that there were undoubtedly many waves of Siberian invaders. Many believe that as they ranged southward, they chanced upon buffalo and pursued them further. These fierce bands became the Navajos and Apaches. Archaeological discoveries have established the fact that at the time of Columbus discovered America, the Navajos were then as far south as the present Canadian border. The Apaches had ranged as far south as Mexico in the 16th century, for they were mentioned in Coronado's writings in 1541. 6 levels. Dr. M.R. Harrington, curator of the Southwest Museum in Los Angeles, who with L.L. Loud of the University of California conducted the archaeological explorations in Lovelock Cave, stated in his report that the cave had been successfully occupied at 6 different levels. The earliest, he states, lies directly on white lacustrine deposits left by Lake Lahontan, the prehistoric lake which covered a large section of Nevada. He believes that the first occupants came soon after the subsidence of the lake and that 1000 BC would be a conservative guess. The recently perfected radium-carbon machine, on which scientists are now relying for accurately computing the exact age of any object which once was living matter, has been used on some of the material recovered from Lovelock Cave, and has fixed the date of 617 BC for that material. The excavation of Lovelock Cave came about as the result of a mining claim located in 1911 by James H. Hart and Samuel Poog of Lovelock. For hundreds of years, the cave had been occupied by bats. The operators started to remove the guano to ship for fertilizer. During the operation, the first Indian baskets, sandals, woven nets, mummies, and numerous other objects were found. The digging of guano was finally stopped when a level was reached where the artifacts and refuse left by the ancient occupants formed a larger deposit than the guano. 10,000 specimens. The University of California then sent L.L. Loud to conduct archaeological excavations. He obtained 10,000 specimens, which were divided between the University of California and the Nevada Historical Society. In 1924, the Museum of the American Indian, Hay Foundation, sent Mr. Harrington to conduct further excavations. Mr. Loud collaborated with him. The Historical Society's display also includes the collection made by John T. Reed of Lovelock. Outstanding in the museum display in Reno is a mummified child, duck decoys made by stuffing the dried duck heads with grasses and pulling the neck down over a bundle of tulle leaves, baskets, worked sticks, ropes of snakeskin and bird skin, head nets, burial nets, and hundreds of other objects. Also, there are some fire arrow foreshafts partially burned, which, as Mr. Harrington pointed out in his report, tend to confirm the Northern Paiute legend concerning the extermination of the last occupants of the cave. The legend. The legend is related by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins in her book Life Among the Paiutes. She was the daughter of old Winnemucca. Her version states that many hundred years ago, a small tribe of barbarians lived along the Humboldt River. They frequently made war on her people and often carried off the women. The Paiutes charged that they were cannibals. Finally, the Paiutes drove them into Lovelock Cave and piled up wood at the mouth. The barbarians pulled the wood in until the cave was full. Then the Paiutes set fire to the wood. In 10 days, she relates, some went back to see if the fire had gone out. They came back to my 3rd or 5th grandfather and told him they must all be dead. The museum's prehistoric exhibits also include many Pueblo artifacts found in Lost City in southern Nevada, and a model of the village where Pueblos lived 2,000 years ago, as well as archaeological finds from Smith Creek, estimated to be 6,000 years old. Probably the most important discovery yet made by archaeologists in Nevada is that of Dr. Harrington's in Gypsum Cave, southern Nevada, where bones of the sloth were found in the same strata with handmade tools, proving that Homo sapiens and those now extinct mammals were once face to face in about 8,500 BC. Nevada scientists doubt myth of cannibal giants. Times are tough for the legendary red-haired cannibal giants, whose alleged existence here centuries ago has been debated for nearly 100 years. Scientists have said there's no proof the giants first described in old Indian tales were cannibals. Chemical staining by earth after burial was advanced as a likely reason why mummified remains have red hair instead of black like most Indians in the area. Now, a new study underway at the University of Nevada indicates the giants were about 6 feet tall and not up to 10 feet tall as had been claimed. What's left is evidence of a tribe separate from principal tribes whose Paiute descendants live here. Perhaps a wandering, more aggressive, but outnumbered band finally hunted down and killed or chased off. Anthropologists say the story, while somewhat tamer, is still fascinating, but they concede the old myth has more appeal and no matter what they say will probably persist. Don Toohey, curator of anthropology at Nevada State Museum, says he's confident the giant myth is about to be debunked. He asked for the latest study after a bundle of giant bones were found in a long overlooked cabinet at the Nevada Historical Society building in Reno. But Toohey says the old tale will probably live on. Dr. Sheila Brooks, chairwoman of the anthropology department at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, is now analyzing the bones which apparently came from Lovelock Cave, a nearby treasure trove for scientists trying to reconstruct Nevada's early history. Dr. Brooks says her initial investigation shows some of the bones were from cows, not giants. The human bones appear to be remains of Indians maybe 6 feet tall. Big, but not that big, she says. The myth was written down in 1883 by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, daughter of a Paiute Indian chief. She told of a strange red-haired tribe of cannibals her ancestors drove into a cave and suffocated by lighting a fire at its entrance. She said the people eaters were so fierce they would leap into the air, snatch arrows whizzing over their heads, and shoot them back at the Paiute attackers. John T. Reed, a Lovelock mining engineer, said Indians took him to the cave in 1886 and told him the same tale. But when he entered the cave, he found nothing but tons of bat guano. Reed was unsuccessful in getting an archaeological dig started immediately, but miners, realizing the value of the guano as fertilizer, started hauling it out in 1911. They promptly turned up bones, baskets, weapons, tools, duck decoys, various other artifacts, and what they described as a 6'6" red-haired mummy. That spurred the first archaeological dig in 1912. A second dig took place in 1924. In an article by Wheeler, it was written, during the 1950s and the 1960s, the Nevada State Museum explored habitation and burial caves in the mountains surrounding Winnemucca Lake, Pyramid Sister Lake, and in 1965, under the direction of its curator of archaeology, Donald R. Toohey, the museum began an extensive project to excavate caves of the Pyramid Lake Basin. These studies, along with prior discoveries in the Fallon and Lovelock Cave areas, indicate that between 9500 BC and AD 1400, at least 3 different prehistoric human cultures moved into and then left northwestern Nevada. There are missing pages in the prehistory of the first 2 cultures, but the recent excavations at Pyramid Lake have provided interesting evidence of how the group lived for approximately 3,500 years. Continuing down in this article by Wheeler, the people of the Lovelock culture may have arrived at the desert lake about 4,000 years ago, taking shelter in caves, many of which had been formed from erosion of tufa rock by the waves of a higher lake. Burials indicate that the Lovelock culture people were people relatively short in stature in comparison with the northern Paiutes who succeeded them. For warmth, they dressed in robes of pelican skins and mammal pelts, wore hats made of basketry, and old-fashioned moccasins of buckskin. Of perhaps the greatest interest to archaeologists is the evidence that these people exhibited some of the elementary traits of a modern human society. Surrounding the lake, they apparently lived in community groups of 3 or 4 families, and near the mouth of the Truckee River, there are indications that a larger settlement may have existed. The remnants of stone piers thought to be community fish traps and rock breakwaters, which could have protected rafts used to raid Anaho Island bird rookeries, indicate that these early people worked together to provide a stable food supply. The many caches of stored food, dried fish, and seeds which cave excavations have yielded suggest that they did develop ways of obtaining ample food, a factor which would allow them to remain settled in one place for several thousand years. Lastly, from the Wheeler article, all archaeological evidence indicates that the people of Lovelock Cave lived successfully at the desert lake and perhaps progressed in certain cultural and economic ways during their long stay. But did they, perhaps 500 years ago, mysteriously disappear? It is possible that the nomadic northern Paiutes invaded and conquered to obtain the Great Basin's most bountiful fishery. John C. Fremont, in his narrative of his discovery of Pyramid Lake, tells of meeting poor-looking Indians who lived in caves along the eastern side of the lake, and he indicates that they were a different tribe than the Paiutes who lived near the mouth of the river. Could these poor-looking Indians have been the survivors of a conquered Lovelock culture? Or, before the arrival of the Paiutes, could environmental changes such as prolonged drought have forced the Lovelock culture to leave their desert lake? Oddly enough, there is evidence that during the 15th century, unexplained migrations occurred among other Western Northern American tribes. From a newspaper article from the Albany Democrat Herald from 1970, they wrote, "Old Paiutes always called the redheads Siwash Indians," said Annie Bill. "But many of my people really wondered if the redheads were Indians. Who ever heard of a red-headed Indian? No Paiute I ever saw had red hair." Annie Bill says her grandparents told her that their grandparents had said the redheads had long faces and were light-skinned like a white man. Clarence Pike Stoker, 69, native of Lovelock and curator of Stoker's Museum in Winnemucca, has on exhibit a skull of one of the giants, as well as baskets, nets, duck decoys, arrowheads, and other artifacts from the Lovelock Cave. Stoker, who has participated in a number of scientific excavations in the cave, believes that if the mummies were not Indians, they may well have been Egyptians. It's very possible they were descendants of Egyptians who sailed to America hundreds of years ago, theorizes Stoker. They were an exceptionally intelligent group of people, said Stoker, as he pointed out a calendar stone taken from the cave. A stone marker, 52 dots on the inside, 365 dots on the outside.
Okay, I have found an exhibit for the Lovelock Cave finds. I want to point something out. There is a human face sculpture, and they've got it very dark in here. It's hard to see, but this does look to have some elongation and strangeness to that face. Next to it is an animal figure, and they have a bear, and I'm sorry about the reflection, but that's the way it is in here. They have an owl, and then they have some of these, they call them larvae. I think those are for the pestles, probably for grinding. Down here they have some more animal carvings from the cave. A horned toad, bighorn sheep, frog, another frog, a rabbit, and then this duck decoy is a replica of what was found in the cave. And then this is a large decorated Lovelock wickerware burden basket. So let's see if I can get most of it on here. Now, there's no mention at all about the mummies that were found, the red-haired rumors, nothing at all. But there is a face. And it is just not easy to get with the darkness in here in this Nevada State Museum and the way that they have it. But look at that. It's just a little bit strange shape. I'm going to try and see if I can get whatever I can get of it. But, behind glass and all that. Okay. And then over here they have a little bit of a story about Spirit Caveman. In 1994, the Nevada State Museum radiocarbon dated a burial recovered in 1940 from the Spirit Cave near Fallon. To everyone's surprise, Spirit Caveman lived over 9,400 years ago. Look here at these Clovis points, 10 to 12,000 years ago, found here. And it resembles the European Solutrean toolkit. Okay, and look at that beveled point. Look at that. I'm going to see if I can back up and get a better picture. It is very dark in here. There's the sandal, the twining. See if I can come over here and get a better, there you go. That's the part of the sandal. And then the mat. Now, if you come over here, all of a sudden here's the Paiute, or they call it the plain weave, and there's a difference. Okay. Now they've got a Lovelock wickerware and coiled. So, except they wouldn't put the time periods on these, so you can't really do as good of a comparison as I'd like to. Okay, so over here, here's a 9,000-year-old granite, and obviously the grass. I don't know if that's real, but they're saying it's 4,000 years ago. Okay. Okay, and then some part of a robe, the rabbit skin, and then Humboldt points. Now, some of them are 7,000 years ago. Those are the ones that begin, to start to look like the Clovis, and then it goes out to 2,000 years ago, and those are more, triangular. So there is a difference. Okay, and I don't see any information or symbols that could lead me, to kind of determine where maybe they came from. But I'm going to go back here for a second. Very interesting, this face, and I'll give you one more shot of it. Okay, it's on the left. It's the white one that they're saying, well, I don't know, human face. And then on the right, it appears that they're saying the right one is an animal figure. Okay. This, you can't see it real well, but it is a little elongated. I'll see if I can get some pictures too on it. Okay, I'm on the more traditional side. This is some Paiute examples of a twined water bottle. It says willow pine, pitch, cloth, straps, Paiute. And then a winnowing tray and a coiled cooking basket. Okay. Over here, they have some interesting pictures. And the one that I find interesting is this teepee-shaped home that they say is a Paiute winter house near Pyramid Lake, 1903, a photograph, Nevada State Museum. Now, it resembles the teepee. And in some of my other work, I showed the Sami, the Nordic people, have the same thing. Now, these people have some cloth, but it appears to be made mostly out of grass and reeds. And then they have their burden basket. I would assume that's for collecting things. Okay. In the summer of 2016, I had a strange dream. I was not going to carry on with my research and request about Lovelock Cave until this dream. It seemed like an impossible task to get around the government, the tribe, and the educational system. But then, in this dream, I was visited by a group of people on the side of my bed in the early morning hours. All I could see was their faces surrounded by a thick cloud of smoke. They were angry and wanted their story told and some justice. They came to check me out and see who I was, and then they left. Next, I saw a long, dark-haired, Native American-looking man sitting on the edge of my bed. He wanted to tell me his side of the story. I already knew it and didn't want to talk anymore. My mind was made up at this point to get at the bottom of Lovelock Cave. Since then, I've tried and tried to figure out who the Lovelock Cave people were and their story, and I will continue until I finish this task. The truth of the past belongs to us all, and so I move forward with it. I had visited Nevada for the first time, starting in 2013 at the Valley of Fire and Sloan Canyon. I went back to Nevada to visit Lovelock Cave in 2015 and visited the Nevada State Museum in Carson City the same year. From 2016 to 2017, I went to court over Lovelock Cave. I lost in the spring of 2017. In 2017, I returned to Nevada and went back to the Valley of Fire. In 2022, I made it to Pyramid Lake and Lake Winnemucca and Lake Tahoe. I went back to Nevada in 2024 and I visited the Lost Village outside of Las Vegas. Starting in 2020, after losing the court case in 2017, I began a program for an advanced degree in anthropology and finished in 2025. During the time in school, I wrote a thesis about Lovelock Cave that was not given a passing grade. I had to write a new thesis on a different subject to fulfill requirements to graduate. What follows is some of the information I was able to look at from an anthropological view when investigating the remains pulled from Lovelock Cave.
While in the process of earning an advanced degree in anthropology, I went back to Nevada and went looking for the over 14,000-year-old petroglyphs known as Winnemucca petroglyphs. I had stopped at the Paiute History Museum on the way and asked about them, and I was told that I could not visit them. Then a white man came up to me and told me that the old ruins were on the side of Winnemucca Lake and that I could go and visit them. We chose to look at those, not knowing at the time that these were the sighted ruins of the Lovelock cave people who were said to have lived on the shores of Lake Winnemucca, per the old newspaper article I had read previously in this film. We were tired and unprepared for the long day, and so I didn't venture further in my explorations, but took as much film as I could from the side of the road. I would find out later that the very old petroglyphs that I was looking for were further up the road on the side of Lake Winnemucca, fully visible and accessible. The part I thought I needed to visit was on the Paiute Reservation in my mind, but I would realize that the Paiute Reservation was the old Lovelock Cave territory, or at least part of it. And the lake that was referred to as the burying lake of the Lovelock Cave people was probably Pyramid Lake. I would find out that many burials and remains were found in caves along these lakes, and remains were found when engineering the lakes for fishing and water conservation. I have heard that Pyramid Lake is haunted, and there are many drownings that have occurred. Sometimes the bodies from Pyramid Lake will end up in the Tahoe River, per some legends online.
Further examination into the legend of the bodies that could end up in Pyramid Lake or in Lake Tahoe reveals that Lake Tahoe actually flows into Pyramid Lake, and it is possible that some bodies from Lake Tahoe floated down the Truckee River into Pyramid Lake. So whether there's a lot of truth to the legends remains to be seen.
So, before me was the ruins of the Lovelock Cave people's village, and they made their homes out of stones and rocks. I wish I had known and had been better prepared, as I would have examined them up close. Walking to them might have been dangerous, as the area is known for rattlesnakes, and those that go up to the ruins usually have off-road vehicles. Perhaps someday I will return more prepared for the examination of those ruins. By the time I began my first thesis, there still were no conclusive answers as to who the Lovelock Cave people were. So I decided to create my first thesis by looking at all of the data out there for the Lovelock Cave people and using anthropological methods to determine if I could pinpoint an ancestry for the Lovelock Cave people. What follows is a combination of data showing various results, but no conclusive evidence or conclusion. As I gathered evidence about the Lovelock Cave people, all that I could come up with were some old black and white photos for the giant skull, a female, a male, and a child, and their remains that were pulled from the cave. There were scant craniometric data measurements and some controversial DNA testing that was allegedly done. All of this begins to put a story together along with articles on examination of the remains by a professor from the University of Nevada. The data confirms that there were remains of tall stature and red hair, but nothing was discussed on the giants that were allegedly pulled from the cave or the peculiar DNA results that came back on some of the skulls or crania from the cave. As I began to collate the data and request access to some of the old documents, it was clear that the data on the Lovelock Cave people was being removed from public access. And it was made clear that I could not have access to the remains that sit in the storage of universities and museums. So I put together what I could with the data that I did have access to. And it is clear that it is going to take a tremendous fight to get access to all of the remains and to be able to do a complete and thorough examination to determine the ancestry of these Lovelock Cave people. And that is only dependent on what remains have not been disappeared permanently. The book Lovelock Cave, written by Llewellyn L. Loud and M.R. Harrington, describes the tremendous amount of artifacts that were pulled from Lovelock Cave, including some of the remains. For purposes of this film, I will not repeat the vast amount of information that they left because it is available to be read. John T. Reed was a mining engineer from Nevada. He had heard about the cave and the giants from his childhood and tried to get a crew out to find it, but was unsuccessful at first. When he found out about the miners who were digging out the guano and that they had found the giants at last, he was able to get into the cave and retrieve certain things and remains around the area. It was his collection that was analyzed by a professor from the University of Nevada. And unfortunately, everything that he found is now off limits to the public, including his notes. We can find some amazing information about what he found in an old newspaper article. Lovelock, July 16th. I took the high road today, a road which winds and climbs above wages, oil stoves, fighting roosters, the price of eggs, and labor wars into the clear azure of John T. Reed Study Laboratory. Reed is a mining engineer, but he spends night and day working on mathematical problems, paleontology, ethnology, and Indian lore. Don't let those words run you away. I want you to meet a man who has dropped the frenzied pursuit of the eagle's shadow to follow his hobbies and to try to give the world something for which he probably will never reap a cent in material reward. I walked into Reed's study, which is piled high with books, Scrolls, artifacts, atlases, skulls of ancient men found in this area, and row on row of papers bearing Reed's mathematical computations. Reed dropped his pencil and paper to welcome me cordially. He didn't have an appointment at 2, and he didn't have to get out a certain quantity of work before the boss got back. I spent the afternoon. First, I asked Reed to tell me what he knows about the giant red-headed men whose remains were found in Lovelock Cave. The scholar told me the following. When I was a boy and lived around here, I used to go buckarooing with old Chief Natchez and his Indians. One night when we were encamped out on the Humboldt Sink, Chief Natchez told me about a Paiute tribal legend which stated that the Paiutes had killed off a tribe of invading red-headed giants. I asked him how long ago that was, and he replied, 4 or 5 generations. Chief Natchez told of a cave of mystery wherein the giants were reputed to have lived and died. The cave was entered and excavated by guano seekers and scientists about 1912. I had been collecting relics and artifacts at that time and became intensely interested in the Indian story. I found the cave and in the 90s wrote and told the University of Pennsylvania of the cave and some of the things that were reputed to be there. The University of Pennsylvania sent 2 professors to Lovelock. They looked at the cave and said they would not spend 5 cents to explore or excavate it. So I undertook a private investigation of the cave and the area surrounding it. Skeletons and relics found have been left by the lost race which inhabited this area are not confined to the cave. Through my study of artifacts, stones, and monuments, I have come to the conclusion that the giants were the lost race of ancient Mayans. I believe them to have been the lost tribes of Joseph and Judah, which the artifacts I have uncovered show to have been in touch with Rome as far back as 735 BC, when Rome was founded. They lived here until 1720 AD. This I also determined by artifacts and mathematical calculations. It seems most logical that the redheads were brought to this continent in ships. In 1000 BC, the Bible says that King Solomon extended his commerce in India via the Red Sea and to the shores of the Atlantic via Gibraltar. Do you think Reed paused significantly that a people, the Hebrews, who wrote that the world hangeth on nothing and is a globe, did not have enough sense to come over here in ships? Reed quoted the book of Isaiah. The scholar's clear blue eyes lighted up as he continued with his story. In Genesis, there is mention of Ammonites and Amalekites, the giant races which lived near the Red Sea. I believe they sailed the seas in very distant times. Reed produced artifacts, most of which are symmetrical pieces of stone with inscriptions and markings. Don't touch any of these specimens, he warned, as I peered into bottles which contained some of the more delicate artifacts. There are 1,000 clues which link the giants with the ancient civilizations. Their language, cranial structure, stage of arts, and Reed removed his gold-rimmed nose glasses to bring home his major point. Their mathematics, which is the real link between them and ancient civilization, all point to their having been from the area of the Red Sea. I asked what language connections he had found. The Indian's word for himself is not Indian, Reed answered. The Indian called himself Numa in his own language. Do you call it a coincidence that Numa is a Latin word? Numa Pompilius was the second king of ancient Rome and ruled before Christ. Reed believes that the Redheads, the lost Mayans, gave the Indians many of their words in their centuries of intercourse with the Indians. Sarah Winnemucca, in her Life Among the Paiutes, wrote that the Paiutes and Redheads spoke the same language. The scholar then cited the word teepee as an example of an Indian word, the root of which is to be found in many languages of the Indo-European or Aryan family of languages. Teepee means stone in Paiute. When the white man came, teepee became the Indian word for house. Now teepee is also the Turkish word for stone. Mount Popocatépetl in Mexico is the mountain or stone of fire. Do you catch the teepee syllable in Popocatépetl? The languages undoubtedly are intertwined. The giant skulls which I have here show that the Redheads were long-headed, and the suture across the nose shows that they had Roman noses. In their stage of art development, the lost Mayans were even skilled in surgery. I have a skull which shows where a Mayan surgeon trepaned the bone. Reed then showed me his most amazing, to me, thing in his entire collection. A miniature of a bearded man, chiseled from marble, which, perfect to the most minute detail, resembles a photograph of Lev N. Tolstoy, the famous Russian novelist. A ranch hand found that 6 miles north of Lovelock, Reed explained. The man is represented as sitting down with a dog in his lap and a pack on his back. He wears a cap with a tassel like a Turkish fez. The ears, nose, beard, and even the hands, fingers, and lips are clearly discernible. The image is white and is about 4 inches high. Reed believes that it was made here by the pre-Indian peoples. In case you never saw a picture of Tolstoy, he looked like Santa Claus without the red suit. The study of mathematics, which is the subject of Reed's most earnest endeavors, is way over my head, especially the approach he is developing. But I shall endeavor, with my meager ability, to give you an idea of Reed's mathematics. He has spent 4 years of day and night work compiling mathematical data, all from stones found around Lovelock. Reed believes that through the stones used by the ancient lost Mayans, he has discovered the pure and exact system of mathematics used by the Mayans. All of our present computations are wrong, slipshod, and inaccurate, the scholar declared. An example of his thoroughness is his use of the symbol pi, which to the average mathematician is roughly 22/7. But to read, pi is, hold on to your linotype there, Mr. Stanley. We're going for a ride. Pi equals 3.14159265352854110. Here's how Reid arrives at the distance between the Earth's poles, giving the Earth's diameter pole to pole as 8, which equals a circle. He squares 8, which 64. 99 is the 100th number if you start with 0. Alright, 99 times 80 equals 7,920, the exact distance between the poles. With the circle as 8 again, and the scale of the Earth as 100, Reid multiplies 100 by 80 to get the diameter of the Earth at the equator. The scholar is preparing tables from the stones for the time when the information will be welcomed by mathematicians, he said. My tables will give the exact distance to the sun. Scientists are guessing now, Reid declared. With the correct distance to the sun and the correct size of the sun computed, I can get the distance and diameter to other heavenly bodies in proportion. Every article of precision, all mathematical instruments, will have to be checked over and made to conform to the Mayan system, the only pure mathematical system which the rocks have revealed to me, he said. Triangulation, records on bones, showed that the Mayans made surveys up and down the Humboldt River, Reid asserted. A passage in the book of Habakkuk in the Bible warns against making the dumb stones speak. Reid believes this is a reference to the law system of mathematics used by the giants and rediscovered by him. Reid plans a museum, an astronomical observatory, and a school to teach the ancient Mayan mathematics. He has worked on archaeology all his life and is now 63 years old. As I grip Reid's hand and turned to leave him, I felt a pang of envy for a man who can drop the petty worries and struggles of a strife-torn world to find solace and unimpeachable incentive in work directed to increase our scant knowledge of the past. So what happened to the John T. Reid papers that were written between 1889 to 1949? Right now, they are in the possession of the Nevada Historical Society. There are 91 boxes and 5 map folders. Boxes 60 through 65 are restricted. Can you guess why? Because those are the boxes on Lovelock Cave and what Mr. Reid found. So, we aren't even allowed to look at documents that were written almost 100 years ago that might have photographs or even more information on petroglyphs or math on stones from that cave. Who has made these restrictions possible? Why is everything about Lovelock Cave disappearing and being removed from access by the public? What are they afraid we will find out? Craniometric data analysis is a method used for identification of a set of human remains and has been used for over 100 years in the analysis of the human skull and its association to ancestry affiliation, sex, and age determination. Craniometric data analysis is a method of gathering measurements between two craniometric landmark points on a skull. Collations of several measurements for various populations have been made for population comparisons, as studies have shown variations in populations for these sets of craniometric data. A series of craniometric data collected by Howells for ancestry variation of crania is used by several software analysis software databases, including Ancestries. Available craniometric data on skeletal human remains from Lovelock Cave and the nearby geographical area were analyzed by me with a current craniometric data analysis software program available to predict ancestry origin. In my case, it was Ancestries that I used, and it was free online. Whether modern day analysis tools can be used successfully to analyze archaic human remains is a question that must be thought about when applying the science. There are three sets of data that are of interest for Lovelock Cave craniometric analysis. The first is a set of data on Lovelock Cave cranium compiled in a book by Gifford in 1926. The second is a group analysis of craniometric data from the Great Basin area done by Carl Kennedy in 1959 that included Lovelock Cave cranium and nearby geographical area cranium with comparisons to craniometric data from nearby Great Basin areas. The third is from a skull found near Lovelock Cave, known as the Humboldt Lake Skull, which was written about by Eric K. Reed in a Utah journal in 1967, with some limited amount of craniometric data and photographs. However, licensing to show this skull was not granted. As I said, Ancestries is a free online program accessible by a web browser that was developed by Portuguese researchers for craniometric data analysis. Ancestries is an ancestry estimation program that uses the random forest algorithm for classification. The database in Ancestries is composed of 23 craniometric variables from 1,734 individuals, representative of 6 major ancestral groups taken from Howells' craniometric series. Craniometric data is still a very good tool for crania analysis and ancestry affinity determination. Forensic anthropologists are very good at determining ancestry from inspection and craniometric data because there are measurable and non-measurable differences between certain groups of people, as noted by Sawyer. With access to a cranium, forensic anthropologists can determine with a high accuracy the gender, age, and ancestry of an individual. Sometimes a minimal number of craniometric measurements can lead to a very high accuracy of ancestry estimation. With just 2 variables, craniometric parameters, the Bayesian-Bayesian length and Bayesian-prosthesion length, forensic anthropologists can separate crania from black versus white Americans with about 80% accuracy, thus showing how important craniometric data is in identifying ancestry affiliation for crania. However, in my case, with the Lovelock Cave remains, I did not have access to do proper and complete measurement of craniometric data. I had to use what was available, and because it was incredibly limited, it is difficult to assume any accuracy, but using the online program was worth a try. So let me discuss what I found. The Lovelock Cave craniometric data analysis for the Gifford data gave mixed ancestry results, including Polynesia and East and Southeast Asia, while the Kennedy series with the Lovelock Cave skulls indicated possible ancestry including Northeast Africa, North and South America, Polynesia, East and Southeast Asia, and Europe. The Lovelock Cave craniometric data was incredibly limited, and thus there is a lack of confidence in any accuracy in the predictions given by ancestries. The craniometric data for the skull found at Humboldt Lake indicated an ancestry affinity to African and Polynesian ancestry. While the Kennedy measurements are average measurements from a series of individuals from different locations and different time periods, the data was still used for analysis. The K-series that did include Lovelock Cave crania, along with nearby area crania, indicated a surprise prediction of European ancestry for the female and Asian. It is clear that without access to the individual remains for further examination, there just isn't enough conclusive evidence about Lovelock Cave using craniometric data analysis. The physical characteristics of the skull found in the Humboldt Lake area near Lovelock Cave, as compared to the physical characteristics of the crania from Lovelock Cave, were vastly different per my observation. There was one surprise in the Carr Kennedy data. There was indication that the cranial capacity of both a male and female were way outside of the norm for cranial capacity. This will be discussed later. The average adult has 206 bones in their skeleton. An adult skull has 22 bones and 6 ear bones, 3 in each ear, for a total of 28 bones. The vault contains 8 bones and the face contains 14 bones. The skull can be used to approximate sex, ancestry, and age. The pelvis can be used to determine sex, and the long bones can be used to approximate the height of a person. With the usage of forensic anthropology's generalized observed characteristics in populations, a visual inspection of a skull can be used to determine sex, ancestry, affinity, and age. And these approximations are the most important aspects in identifying someone from their human remains by using non-metric traits. Height cannot be determined by visual inspection of long bones, but can be estimated by ancestry-based formulas using length of the long bones. Various equations have been published over the last century for stature estimation. The analysis may not always be 100% accurate, especially when populations mix. Traditional forensic anthropology divided populations into 3 groups: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid, while modern divisions can be labeled as European, Asian, and African, with each group having general skull and bone characteristics, and while also having craniometric and non-metric data studied for each population group and other subgroups of the divisions. Non-metric traits can be observed from photographs of the Lovelock Cave people. Age estimation can be made by doing a simple visual inspection of tooth eruption. Children have average ages in which different teeth erupt, and thus an age estimate of the human remains can be made by looking at tooth eruption and whether all of the adult teeth have erupted. The bones are also fused for an adult, and this can also be used for age estimation. After the age of 25 to 30, age estimation can be made based on degenerative changes. Sex estimation is made doing visual inspections of the skull and pelvis. However, this estimation can only be done on adults, as secondary characteristics don't manifest until puberty. Looking at adult long bones may also help in sex determination, as male long bones may be typically larger in diameter than female long bones. Non-metric trait analysis was used to initially help in identification of the Lovelock Cave people by doing a visual inspection of crania skull photos to determine if there are any key features that can be used for identification, and then by looking at collections of non-metric trait data to draw possible conclusions on ancestry, age, and sex. Photographs of study populations for comparison are becoming more limited to access due to cultural sensitivities, which illustrates the urgency of this work. The photos of the Lovelock Cave crania are put side by side with control skulls from bone clones of the same sex. For visual inspection, I would classify all of the Lovelock Cave crania as appearing more European in appearance than Asian, with the large skull possibly belonging to an individual with gigantism and possibly acromegalia, or just simply a person of giant and tall stature. 2 Viking skull photographs were found online that were CC licensed and were also used in the comparison. After I compared the photos of the skulls from Lovelock Cave to the photos of the Viking skulls, it is, in my opinion, there's some minimal similarity, but perhaps not an exact match. My visual inspection of the photograph of the Lovelock Cave giant indicates that there is a slight slant to the orbits, which are very rectangular and unusual as compared to any of the anthropologically classified populations. The cheekbones are receding. Looking at the photograph and the description given in the article, I would classify the large male as probably belonging to a European male that has some kind of a genetic or other anomaly disorder to create gigantism. My observation of the photograph of the skull is that it appears to have teeth that may be either filed or worn down. Since the lower jaw is missing from the photograph, an approximation can only be made of what the full skull looked like based on the skull photo and the description of the lower jaw in the newspaper article. Looking at the female cranium and noting that she has aviator glass-shaped eye orbits, a little bit longer nasal opening, and receding cheekbones, I would characterize her as a European female. And this can include Caucasoid racial groups from Slavic countries, Russia, and Ukraine. Although the article categorizes her hat as Asian, It is important to note that similar looking hats have been found amongst barbarians and Vikings. There is no indication of gigantism or anything unusual about her skull. The male skull that was photographed and included in Loudon Harrington's 1929 book, Lovelock Cave, was from a male adult retrieved from Lovelock Cave. The skull also has a similar appearance to the female cranium in the 1952 news article, with classical skull features attributed to European ancestry. The child's skull is difficult to analyze. A child's face will change the most until adulthood, and I will not attempt to use forensic anthropology to analyze the child's skull, other than noting the wider head typical of a child. In summation, I would categorize the Lovelock Cave skulls or crania appearing more European than Asian, due to the shape of the eye orbits and nasal openings. There are clear differences in the eye orbits and the nasal aperture between the Lovelock Cave skulls and crania and other skulls found in the nearby area, such as the Humboldt Lake skull. The Lovelock Cave giant skull does appear to have similarities in the eye orbits and nasal aperture with skulls with acromegalia, per my observation. Gigantism and acromegalia are two different physical anomalies that could cause the skull and body of an individual to be different and larger than the average individual without either condition. Both conditions can cause the skull to be much larger with greater capacity and thicker than an average individual. A control skull replica from an individual with acromegalia was also purchased and photographed as allowed per bone clones to use a comparison. Since the ancient legends of the Lovelock Cave people specifically cited the group as consisting of red-headed white giants, a look at individuals with gigantism and or acromegalia will give better insight into whether the legends are possibly true. An additional comparison of an individual with acromegalia and gigantism can also be made by comparing the Lovelock Cave skull to that of a skull or cranium of a giant from the Mutter Museum. This individual from the Mutter Museum, known as the American Giant, was said to be 7 foot 6 foot tall, a male from Kentucky who died in his early 20s. His identity is unknown. An analysis of the American Giant was made by Dr. Guy Hinsdale in 1898. He observed that a large percentage of giants had their condition due to a pituitary anomaly. However, a genetic study has also identified a gene linked to gigantism known as FIPA, or familially isolated pituitary adenomas, causing pituitary adenoma predisposition due to the mutations in the aryl hydrocarbon receptor interacting protein AIP gene. FIPA families have a genetic disposition to gigantism, and they present around 2% of the pituitary adenomas. An analysis of the skeleton of the American Giant that was procured from the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia was done by Dr. Hinsdale, including the gathering of craniometric data, which will be used to compare to the giant skull of Lovelock Cave. The American giant skull also had evidence of acromegalia. The pituitary fossa was quite large, indicating a pituitary adenoma. The estimated height, again, was 7 foot 6 inches. At the time of analysis of the American Giant, the medical doctor also made comparisons to other known giants such as the Irish giant, Cornelius McGrath, and the London giant, Charles Byrne, and to the Edinburgh skull with acromegalia. All of the giants had increased skull capacity beyond the average human skull, cited with a mean of 1,408 cubic centimeters. And the following for the giants listed: the Irish giant as having 1,600 cubic centimeters, the Byrne giant as 1,520 cubic centimeters, the American giant of 2,320 cubic centimeters. The acromegaly skull had 1,580 cubic centimeters. The American giant skull bears evidence of its great size. Forensic art. When only photos of a skull are available, the science of forensic art can be used to obtain sketches and approximations of what an individual looked like by using the photograph of the skull as a basis for sketching the person of interest. The science of forensic art can be used to reconstruct the image of a set of remains. However, it is not only dependent on studies of population facial measurements and ratios, it is also dependent on what the requester, witness, or victim is able to tell the artist about the person in question. Thus, there may be some issues with interpretation of the unidentified person of interest if no one has ever seen them. However, a good and highly trained forensic artist can flesh out the details needed and will understand how to draw and sketch a person of interest based on known cranial metrics and characteristics. Several old photos of the Lovelock Cave human remains have been retrieved, but at this time there are no photos that exist for the Lovelock Cave remains beyond 1952, to my knowledge. And the photos are limited to access to what was previously published, although it is possible there are additional photos that are not accessible to the public. Yet, these published black and white photos are still usable for the forensic art portion of the Lovelock Cave people analysis. Anthropologists can help to identify human remains using the skull, and the identification usually falls into two categories: skull photo superimposition and forensic image comparison. In the absence to access the skull photo superimposition is the choice when only a skull or photo of the skull is available. The Karen-Taylor method that is used in the forensic art portion of this analysis involves applying anthropological data based on populations to determine tissue depth for a skull. After the tissue depth markers are attached to the skull, a photo of the skull that has been positioned on a Frankfurt horizontal plane is taken. The forensic artist then uses this photo to draw an estimated facial approximation of the skull in question. The forensic artist makes an estimate on the photos as to where the tissue depth markers would have been in the photo and has drawn an approximation of the face from the skull photo. Al DiBella was an experienced forensic artist that had been trained to do forensic drawings and had an extensive background in the science with a track record of results. I had hired Al DiBella to do a forensic artwork compilation of the human remains pulled from Lovelock Cave that were photographed, and also the European control skull from bone clones. An approximation to the Karen-Taylor method was used by Al DiBella to create 4 facial approximations from the Lovelock Cave crania skulls based on the photographs. After looking at the results, it would appear that the Lovelock Cave human remains appear to be more of European ancestry than Asian ancestry, per my visual observation, yet there's some ambiguity that these human remains may have belonged to individuals with mixed ancestry. The goal was to see if ancestry for the Lovelock Cave people could be indicated with forensic art. Forensic art is a good tool, but it requires the help of other scientific identification methods, such as forensic anthropology and DNA testing, to be absolutely sure of the ancestry affiliation of unknown human remains. Again, without a combination of data, the use of forensic art cannot be used solely to determine ancestry affiliation. The results add an additional piece of information about the Lovelock Cave people, and the forensic portraits bring a human aspect to the anthropological analysis of the remains that were pulled from the cave, reminding us that these people lived like us long ago and they deserve to be respected and remembered for who they were and what happened to them. DNA analysis. Ancient DNA analysis is a new method used to examine and analyze ancient DNA from remains to determine ancestry and possible migration of ancient people. The science is evolving and is a great method that can complement traditional archaeological examination of ancient sites and remains. DNA analysis of hair can provide mitochondrial DNA. Bone or teeth can be used to retrieve nuclear and mitochondrial DNA, which can be used to determine the maternal and paternal lineage and other DNA markers. Currently, it is alleged that there has been some DNA analysis done for 4 or 5 individuals retrieved from Lovelock Cave. DNA analysis of the 4 or 5 individuals from Lovelock Cave was reported in 2018 in an article in conjunction with analysis of other ancient human remains from America. The Lovelock Cave remains were also radiocarbon dated to the late Holocene period, about 3,000 years ago. In 2018, there was an apparent DNA testing of 5 remains that came from Lovelock Cave. The article discussed only 2 of these remains and cited them as having similar female lineage as other Native Americans. What is of interest is the supplement to this 2018 article, and I'm going to read the important part. Of particular interest was the Y chromosome of Lovelock 4 individual, which was negative for QL54, becoming the second fully sequenced non-QL54 Y chromosome from the Americas not belonging to haplogroup C, as the 4.5 kiloyear-old Paleo-Eskimo from Greenland. The Lovelock 4 fell basal to QYP4011 haplogroup and is ancestral to most SNPs found in Eastern Europeans. QYP4004. This suggests a very ancient split, although the low coverage of the sole sample makes detailed inferences tentative. Now, here is a connection to Eastern Europeans, which also are known to have red hair and tall stature. What the results were of the other remains is unknown. Now, after this study, there was another publication that came out claiming that a living relative to this Lovelock 4 remains exists. And that's all I'm going to say about this person, who deserves to have their privacy right now, even though they did put a photo of this person in the article. And I do not have permission to repost it, but it's interesting because that person looks like the man that was drawn in the forensic sketch that was done by Al DiBello. Forensic analysis of the John T. Reed collection. In 1977, a number of boxes were uncovered containing the skeletal remains from the Reed collection, and these were sent to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and they were analyzed by a physical anthropologist. Now, John T. Reed had concluded that the skeletal remains he had recovered, including a thigh bone or femora, belonged to a giant. And he had estimated that their height was 7 foot 7 inches. It is noted that hair is preserved on some of those skulls, and there's still soft tissue adhering to it. The hair is reported as brownish red in color, and this confirms the description of the red-headed giant stories as told by the Paiutes. Now, the Reed collection had 31 remains. Perhaps not all of them belonged to Lovelock Cave, because he also was known to pick up remains around the area. Dr. Sheila Brooks did the analysis. Of the remains studied, only 6 of the male skeletons, but none of the female skeletons, had complete long bones, of which length measurements could be obtained. Excluding the results of the radii and ulnae, the range of statures derived from the long bone measurements from the Reed collection were from 5 foot 5 inches to 5 foot 10 inches, with a standard deviation of 2 inches. Thus, this scientist or physical anthropologist concluded that the maximum height was 5 foot 11 and up to 6 foot, if they included any kind of error estimate. There was none that were concluded to be over 7 feet tall. Yet, 5 foot 11 to 6 foot or 6 foot 1 is still pretty tall compared to what the average Paiute was and other Native Americans in the area, as per other measurements and studies of the time. But being 5 foot 11 with a 2-inch possible error does not qualify someone as a giant. This scientist concluded that Reed had made a mistake in his formula used to determine height. He didn't understand that that bone fit inside the femur and assumed that it indicated a person of much taller stature than it was. Yet, the redheadedness of the Lovelock Cave people was absolutely confirmed by this scientific study. In this study, however, it was suggested that the red hair came from red ochre. Yet there was no indication of what test was done to prove this. It was also cited that post-mortem processes could have changed the darker hair to red. Again, this does not fit the story of the red-haired Lovelock Cave people, giants who had red hair prior to death. It is also known that the Paiute never cited any kind of red ochre hair dyeing being done by the Lovelock Cave people. So from this study, we do have a confirmation of red hair and tall stature, but not gigantism. So it is an interesting study. And again, whether those remains all came from Lovelock Cave is questionable in my mind, but they were part of the John T. Reed collection, so there was probably a certain number of them that did, and possibly some of it was in the nearby area because he was said to have found other remains or been given other remains in the area or artifacts. So we do have confirmation of red hair and tall stature, just not gigantism from this 1970s study. Now, doing a quick look at some of the ancient artifacts and stories found around ancient America and those in Europe, we do have some strange connections. The Ho-Chunk people from the Midwest have a folklore about Redhorn, who is said to be a giant man with red hair put back in a ponytail that was working with them to fight red-haired giants that were cannibals. But he was killed by the cannibals. We have other stories of a copper culture indicating that tools and weapons were made of copper. We have similarities in petroglyphs from ancient Nevada and also different parts of the Americas that match petroglyphs found in ancient Ireland. We have a statue known as the Wabunzi stone, which is of a bearded white man found in ancient Chicago or from ancient Chicago that is similar in design to sacrifice stones found in ancient Ireland, known for being sacrifices for their ancient god Crom Cruach. We have duck decoys that were found in Lovelock Cave connecting to ancient Australia, to ancient duck decoys that were made there, and connections to the Ngati Hotu found in New Zealand that have confirmed to included ancient red-haired Caucasoid people. We have found alleged anchors in Florida that match Mediterranean anchors from long ago. We have found various bearded white man statues found not only in ancient America, such as in the John T. Reed collection, but in Mexico as well. We have red-haired elongated skulls found in ancient Peru with the possibility of being done through head binding or skull binding, and that is connected to Etowah Mounds in Georgia, and it connects to Eastern Europe, where head binding was done in some of the areas of Eastern Europe as well. And strangely, we have Native American stories and legends about the hairy man who was a giant and a cannibal and who would abduct some of their women and mate with them, producing an offspring who could possibly fit in with the tribe or not, but would be of taller and stronger stature than other tribal members. So there are various connections. We have also confirmed that the Vikings were in the Americas, and we have confirmed that at the La Ox Meadows site in Newfoundland. And there are other suggested Viking sites that may go into Michigan and other places. We also have tales of St. Brendan and other people said to have come to the ancient Americas via boat. So there are many connections between the ancient Americas and not only Eastern Europe, but Western Europe. There are even suggestions that ancient Romans were in ancient America at a time.
All the way up there. You can see some of it pretty good. Yeah, it's a climb up here. But that, I believe, is Phoenician-like. Probably a crab or a scorpion. Not quite sure. Water symbol. That might even be another ship symbol. Symbols. And there is that sun spiral again. There it is. Same thing at Doth. And the concentric circles and the other ship-like petroglyph. There it is, right there. Okay. This is at Lattle Rock at Valley of Fire. All right, look at this. It's like being on Mars. The dirt is red, and the plants are green and greenish blue. Let me go slow. Valley of Fire. We're going to go look over at some other petroglyphs. Okay, I'm back at a different panel. Valley of Fire by Lattle Rock. I'm going to try and go slower. There's that sun spiral. Well, the animals. Another one. Trying to go slow so you can catch it. That's weird. And I think there's something over here. Hold on. But let me show you what this is like down here. So, I don't know who was making this stuff, but they had to climb all the way up to get to that area and make that. It's all over here. It's all over. Same symbols all over Nevada. Same symbols that I've seen in Doth in Ireland. No, there you go. Black sun. That's another at Lattle. That's what the guy's showing us. Now these sun spirals, I don't know what that's supposed to be. 2 years maybe? They're here? Maybe each one represents a year? I don't know. Now let's see what else is here. Just look at this, guys. Imagine people going through here. And we don't know who these people were. They just say Native Americans. Yet we have the same sun spiral symbol in ancient Ireland. And this isn't far from Lovelock Cave, where they talked about red-haired people all over ancient Nevada. Someday, if I can, I'd like to go get a PhD and come back here and solve this mystery. And you know, I've tried, and the nonsense that I'm putting up with, because those mummies exist and we can easily figure this out, but I've got a lot of hurdles in my way right now. So until then, we'll have to keep wondering and hitting it. But this is beautiful. I have to wonder if each one of those sun spirals represents a year or some kind of a time thing. I don't know. Okay, I'm close to the Lovelock area, and I guess this used to be a cave that they were using, whoever it was. And it got destroyed, rocks slid down. There are some petroglyphs close to it. And there are some steers, I'm going to show you, carved into the rock. And there's quite a few people here, as you can hear. So these are some remnants of the steers that were carved into the rock, just like right by Lovelock Rock. But that apparently was the cave that they were living in for a while. And probably over there. Now I see some really interesting things. I'm going to head over there. Take a look. This is the backside where those ship and sun spiral panels were on, of this huge rock that had stairs carved into it. So I wonder, was it a lookout point? I don't know. Maybe it was. So let's go take a look. Now this huge rock right here, I'm pretty sure is got a huge amount of petroglyphs on it. I'm going to go over there and take a look. That's an interesting way the sticks fell. Alright. Up here at the big rock again. Been climbing all over the place. One of the most interesting walls of the petroglyphs in this area. I'm going to go up a little further. Okay, recording. Valley of Fire, the Lovelock area. I want to point out a few things on here. Let me get a little closer. This is one of the most interesting ones, next to the rocks that had the sun spirals. I've talked about that one. That's very similar to the tattoo that was on one of the Terra mummies. Next to this goat, or sheep, or whatever it is, on the concentric circles, appears, I don't know if that's a footprint or a creature, but it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digits. Lots of different things. Look at that one, like a hand. Like baby foot, look at the baby footsteps. There's that spiral. The snake thing. Looks like the animals. More adult-sized footprints. This thing, I don't know what that is. Look at that. That almost looks like Egyptian or something. Or bird. I don't know what that is. So just take a quick look. That looks like trails. Don't know. Looks like some kind of a turtle. I don't know what that is. A lot of stuff going on here. A lot of it's worn. Interesting though. This looks like Ogham. This is the same stuff I saw in Ireland. Right here by that ladle. Okay, I'm a little closer here. This looks like Ogham. Let's go slow. I need to get some help to figure out if that's what this is. Look at it. And up above it is that snake spiral, the same thing that was on the curbstone in Ireland. So I don't know what that is. And look at that. I don't know if it's ogham or something else crossed off. There's a snake, the snake spiral. See it? Hold on. See if I can get that. There it is. And what is that? Turtle and animals. I'd really like to know what all the, lines are. What that's supposed to mean. I mean, this whole large rock has lines all over the place. Like, it looks like ogham. I just don't know. And there's a symbol in there. Like that Y. A lot of it's worn off. And the big eyes. Whatever the heck that is supposed to be. I don't know. I'd really like to know. This whole wall has a lot of it, but it looks like a lot of it was worn off. You know, I mean, is this ogham? I don't know. I mean, you got a whole bunch of stuff down here. You can see some graffiti, but I mean, really like to know what all this means, and especially these little marks like that. One last look. You know, you pretty much have to climb up all these stairs. Not too bad to get up to that Atlatl rock, but you know, this is where they were hanging out for a while, whoever it was. Okay, this is claimed that this is a 150 million year old petrified log that was in the Valley of Fire. I'm going to turn around and show you. It's guarded, but this is behind the chain link. This is what they claim is 150 million years old. I don't know if I buy it. Whatever. It should be solid. Doesn't look quite solid to me, but okay. That's what they claim. Let me take a look. Here it is, out in our desert. I'm sure there's other ones. So this was a forest area at one point. Isn't that interesting? What happened? What happened? And this is another one over here. This is what they're claiming is 150 million years old. Here, I'll go over it. You can see it real good. Okay. Yeah. That's what they claim. It doesn't look a solid rock to me, but that's what they claim. And they got it guarded so you don't take parts of it and destroy it. Out here in the desert. Okay. Why am I not living here? This is probably where I need to come. Lots to study here. Look at it. Hot though. I mean, end of November here almost, and it's still hot. Wouldn't want to be here in the summer, obviously. But this is beautiful.
To understand my feelings about Lovelock Cave, you would have to see 10 years of my work and effort. The amount of work and money and time it has taken to put this research together is astounding, and I still don't have any final conclusions. There is a whole army of individuals who benefit from controlling history and the truth. The Lovelock Cave situation is just one example of how the past is controlled to gain rights, victimhood, erasure of genocide involvement, tax money, and identity. I find this whole situation disappointing, and especially disappointing in the academic world. How I wish I had people like Dr. Christy Turner around that I could work with on this subject, and others who have suddenly died like Al DiBella. I am alone in this fight now, but I am searching for a team. I will not let this go, and I want justice and answers. I have spent the last 10 years of my life running down the truth of Lovelock Cave. My time and effort doesn't even include the money that I have spent on this subject. What have I learned from all of this research? 1. Pyramid Lake appears to have been the burial waters or burial grounds for the Lovelock Cave people. Winnemucca Lake was one of the locations of habitation, as well as Humboldt Lake for the Lovelock Cave people. 2. The ruins of the Lovelock Cave people's stone houses are still present on the dried up shores of Lake Winnemucca. Some of their petroglyphs appear to have been left on rocks near Lake Winnemucca. 3. The Winnemucca petroglyphs that are estimated to be 14,500 years old are likely the petroglyphs belonging to the Lovelock Cave people or other people that came before them. According to Don's maps, the location of these petroglyphs is on the western edge of Lake Winnemucca. 4. There were petroglyphs inside Lovelock Cave that are now missing. There were petroglyphs on stones and rocks retrieved from Lovelock Cave, and these stones and rocks are now missing. 5. A bearded white man statue made of marble was found a few miles from Lovelock Cave and was part of the John T. Reed collection. 6. There was a claim that some of the items that the Lovelock Cave people made, including some that it had cotton in it, and one professor believed cotton was being grown in ancient Nevada via the use of irrigation, and that this knowledge was lost until the whites reintroduced cotton farming to America. 7. The Lovelock Cave people occupied the island in Pyramid Lake and left pictures on the rocks. 8. The remains of some of the Lovelock Cave people are still around in the collections of museums and institutions. 9. The Lovelock Cave people did indeed have reddish-brown hair. The reasoning for the red color has been cited to multiple conflicting explanations. One theory claimed it was from red ochre, and another theory claimed that the ammonia released after death caused the hair to change its color to red post-mortem. None of these theories explain the pre-existing red hair of the Lovelock Cave people as cited in Paiute legend, and nothing in the Paiute legends cited red ochre as being used by the Lovelock Cave people to dye their hair. The Lovelock Cave males did have tall stature, as opposed to the height of the average Paiute. But those that have used anthropological methods to determine height cite that none of the remains they examined were over 7 feet tall, but some may have been over 6 feet tall. 11. Some of the large skulls were abnormal, and one was photographed in an old newspaper article. Claims exist that there were at least 5 giant males with red hair that were originally found inside Lovelock Cave and have since disappeared. There was evidence of a fire in Lovelock Cave. That's number 12. 13. It appears that one of the Lovelock Cave people may have committed suicide, as evidenced by a rope around his neck. 14. Cannibalism may or may not have occurred by the Lovelock Cave people. The evidence is conflicting. 15. There was violence in the area, as evidenced by the Lovelock Cave shaman head blow. 16. The Lovelock Cave case is politically charged, and there is much to lose by some groups if history changes and land rights and water rights are challenged. 17. There appears to be a coordinated effort to prevent accurate analysis of population origins of ancient Americans, in my opinion. 18. The older stories of Native American people are being changed by Native Americans, by academia, by online naysayers, and with the aid of the United States government to allow historically recognized Native Americans to benefit from revisionist history and to make claims to ancient remains that may or may not be related to them, is proven out by the complete change in claims made in old newspaper articles and old books and old records of findings as to who lived in the Lovelock Cave area, who made the petroglyphs, and who was run out or genocided from habitations near Pyramid Lake and Winnemucca Lake and near the Lovelock Cave. 19. The war between the Paiutes and the Lovelock Cave people was probably around the 1400 CE, or perhaps as late as 1800 CE. 20. Academia is unwilling to correct the issue of unclear Lovelock Cave identity ancestry currently, per my observation. 21. A lot of ancient American history is being erased in a coordinated effort, in my opinion. Actual remains and artifacts and articles and photographs about ancient Americans are disappearing from the public eye, and existing documentation is now off limits to the public or researchers in the case of Lovelock Cave. For example, the John T. Reed papers about Lovelock Cave are off limits. And 22. Existing remains that are well documented as coming from Lovelock Cave could be DNA tested, and this would put an end to the question of who the Lovelock Cave people were if enough DNA can be retrieved and tested. But ultimately, we still don't know what happened to the Lovelock Cave giant remains that were found and photographed. And as the public wisens up and asks more questions about these remains of ancient giants, the laws are getting stricter. And the photographs even of these ancient remains are being disappeared and perhaps in some cases altered. Lastly, I recognize that I can't uncover the truth about Lovelock Cave alone. I need a team of experts and have to request again to be able to DNA test and examine known and documented remains from Lovelock Cave. The ability to do so does not look very promising. At the minimum, I have brought some of their story to the surface. But ultimately, more work needs to be done, and the doors must be blasted open to learn the truth regarding these strange legends of old and of the red-haired giants of ancient America, and how historical events really occurred in our human past. Those who wish to stop this from happening are benefiting politically and financially, in my opinion. There may be even a darker reason behind all of the censorship. This darker reasoning may have something to do with legends of ancient giant races that had long lifespans. There are whispers and conspiracies that elites are looking for these remains to study the DNA and perhaps determine what the genetics are to allow for longevity and long lives so that they may steal this secret for themselves. In addition, I see many in academia becoming enraged and politically motivated when suggestions of a different history occurring in the Americas or of conflicting evidence that challenges current accepted history is brought up. Yet there is much to lose if things are not taken care of. Those that don't know their past will not be in control of their present nor their future, and will become the victims and slaves of lies and revisionist history. There may be even something more sinister, as I previously said, in regard to the suppression of examination of old remains. Stories about the hairy man being a cannibal are also to be considered, as the hairy man was cited as kidnapping human women and producing offspring with them. Time is running out for the Lovelock Cave people. I fear that their remains will disappear eventually forever, and their story will be thoroughly erased and unprovable history will prevail. Perhaps they were just Eastern Europeans mixing with Asian people that came and went and populations changed. But if we cannot have access to those remains, we're never going to know. I believe the spirits of the Lovelock Cave people may still be around, and they may be angry and waiting for some justice and recognition of the genocide they suffered. There are strange stories of hauntings and modern-day deaths associated with Pyramid Lake that continue to this day. Perhaps the reason is that Pyramid Lake was perhaps the burial waters or burial ground of the Lovelock Cave people, and maybe even Lake Winnemucca as well, as cited in the old newspapers. The Lovelock Cave people have been forgotten and disrespected, and it is my goal to change that and have an accurate history of what happened in ancient America.